decided we were going to do, yeah. I mean, we were thinking we were going to go, here's the cheese, yeah. We haven't had any food, so there you go. Okay, so shall we go live? Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Schools Forum. I'm Alison Mould, Vice Chair of the Forum, and I'll be chairing today's meeting. This event is being held in Kensington Town Hall and is being live streamed on YouTube, where members of the public and the media are welcome to watch the meeting remotely and listen to the discussions taking place. Before we proceed with the meeting, I will ask members of the committee and those in attendance to please make sure your mobiles are on silent and switched off. Membership forms invited to know the vacancies for special schools and academy representatives. Let's go around the papers. A2, apologies for absence. Apologies have been received peculiarly for Andrew O'Neill, Julie Ely, Rebecca Tins, Grant Monaghan, and Andrew is being substituted this evening, admirably, by Mr. Ward. Yes. Declarations of interest. Does any member of the forum have any interest? No. So, minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of March 2025.
On the third page of the minutes, on this post-meeting note, it's clearly been lifted from a letter and the wording needs to be changed in the final sentence. So I suggest, in the event of a successful challenge, schools will be liable to pay the higher 15% rate, and the council therefore strongly advise that schools make provision for this possibility.
And we've changed a piece of paper with that wording on, but I'm not sure we've got all of it down here.
Yeah, I'll just make sure it's right, because I've written too many schools. Certainly, yeah.
Is everybody happy with that amendment? Washing, David?
Yeah, it's nothing to do with error or anything. It's just about membership. I don't know. Is it appropriate to raise it now as a matter of pricing?
Should we do it now if you want to? Yes, absolutely.
But I just wanted clarity about whose responsibility it is. Is it the primary heads at consultative, or is it Jackie Saddington in regard to having a new primary academy representative? So I just don't know the answer to that. And we do have a meeting of the consultative next week, so we can go into that.
We've just been talking about.
I see.
Jackie Saddington, isn't it?
She
will send a thing round and invite applications.
She normally does for vacancies, doesn't she? Yeah.
Okay, super. Thank you.
Back to the minutes. Will we happy, subject to Peter's amendment, to agree them? And is the forum happy for me to sign them as a correct record? That is yes. Yes. And A5, dedicated schools grant outturn and school balances as at, according to this, 31st of March 2025. Anita, I think you and Nicola are going to do this.
Yes, thank you. Yes, we're going to split the way we present the paper. I'll do the DSG outturn, and then Nicola's going to talk about the school balances and then the review of the excessive balances, potential allocations, that methodology. You'll see in paragraph 1.1 that since the last forum in March, we actually had a reduction to our DSG in relation to early years. So I just make a point of that, noting that. And then moving on to table 1, looking at the DSG outturn. And you'll see that overall we had an 841,000 underspend, and that's made up of the 3 different areas of the DSG. In early years, we had an overspend. So this wasn't expected overspend, and it's in relation, we've identified it's in relation to deprivation payments. There's been overpayments relating to deprivation, so we spent over twice as much as the budget set aside for deprivation, and we know it's something to do with the early years system and how it's identifying payments that are needed. But an investigation is underway to try and identify what the issue is, then we can obviously correct it. But at the moment, we don't know, for a reason of we don't know what's actually gone wrong. And then moving on to the schools and central school services block, where we've got 188,000 underspend. The majority of that, 157,000, relates to school restructuring costs. So that's the bit that we've de-delegated with Forum's agreement for maintained schools. So we're going to keep that 157,000 set aside in 25-26 for that purpose. And it may mean that, we'll see where we are when we're looking at the 26-27 budgets. Do we need a lower delegation for that purpose? But so we're certainly not proposing to spend that on anything else. We'll set it aside. And then high needs and underspend of 913,000, which is quite close to the original planned contribution to the DSG deficit recovery. However, there are some variances within that. So we did have quite sizable overspend on top-ups, and that's reflecting the ask of schools for us to review the top-ups and reflect the pay award. So that's as expected. And then we had an overspend on SEN outreach, and then an underspend on sensory impairment and language support. They're the main reasons for the change since the last forecast. So I think so that's quite a big difference on that sensory impairment and language support. I think that's another area that we've been reviewing, and I think what we'd had as our forecast and what we had as a budget, we were in effect double counting things. So we never paid it out. So it means that we're going to have an underspend in that area in 25-26 as well. We need to go forward. We can correct the budget, but the budget was too high. So then if we look at the overall DSG position, moving to look at table 2 on page 13, you'll see that the deficit balance with that underspend in 24-25, we've now got an overall deficit of 3,287,000. At the moment, we're still waiting to hear what the government are going to do about the ring fence of DSG deficits, which is due to end next March. We don't know what's going to happen about that. And apparently we should hear something in the autumn term. I'll pass over to Nicola.
Could I, apologies, could I just have something before we move on to school balances? Is that okay, Chair? You made a helpful point, Anita, about the underspend on school restructuring costs on page 12. And just to flag the proposal that obviously the underspend adds to what's in the current budget. Obviously, we don't discuss individual schools here at Forum, but we are expecting probably at least 2 relatively significant business cases which will be spent against that budget area. So I would support what Anita's proposing, that the underspend of the previous year as well as the year budget is set aside for that purpose. Of course, we'll report back to Forum in the usual way.
Can I ask a question of Anita before we move on to balances? Sorry, just going back on the overspend, and I may have completely misunderstood this point, but what concerned me slightly is if early years providers received that money and made provision, maybe even taken on staff dependent on it, and yet you're talking about falling back, I'd be very concerned about that. And I'd like an assurance from council that particularly any schools that are really struggling financially will not be impacted by this, because it's not their fault. No. But it may not be schools that are impacted by this.
Yeah, we don't know, I suppose, whether, but it is it's clearly something that's been, well, the fact that the figure's so high, it does relate to overpayments. So
I understand that, but if schools have relied on that with very tight budgets, I think they should be allowed to.
The payments, I don't think, would have been that significant because it's only a very small part of the whole rate they receive. But obviously, in some cases, some early year settings, especially smaller early year settings, may have received more funding. But I think that once we identify what the main issue was, and I have spoken to the DfE about this, so they are aware as well, we will be able to identify next steps taking into consideration the size of the settings, the circumstances, etc.
And will you come back to Forum on that to give us assurances that these types of schools have not been impacted? Thank you.
Is this a national problem?
We are talking to other local authorities. We're aware that some other local authorities that use the same system as we do, called Synergy, have had similar issues. So again, it may have happened in other areas because it's a relatively new aspect that we have added onto that system. So.
Chris, did you have a question?
Sorry.
No, it was Amanda.
Sorry. Jack, go on.
I just wanted to understand what has been communicated to early year settings. Are they aware of this? Because obviously we're talking about it for
Not
what's
at-
the information that's been
Not
communicated?
at this point in time, because we just identified that issue less than a month ago. And before we go to settings, we want to make sure that we understand what the issue was and go back with a definitive answer with regard to next steps, etc. Because we don't want settings to worry about it. For the time being, we have communicated the fact that we will pause those payments for the time being. So settings are aware that there is an issue with the system. And then once we understand what the issue was, we'll go back to early year settings, if that makes sense. So
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. I guess it's just that we're, in terms of the payments there, in 2 more terms, and if
Yeah.
you're talking about rebalancing, this is the longest term.
yeah.
So therefore the
Well,
longest
we
rate.
make monthly payments, so but yes, and I think deprivation payments are also monthly. So for the time being, we've just paused that element, if that makes sense. So
No, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Jackie?
I understand that deprivation payments, you can't work out where those overpayments have been made. But you will know whether they're concentrated, whether current payments are more likely to be made to maintain nurseries or PDIs, or is there an equal spread of where those payments are currently? So you
I'd
must know
say
that.
quite equal. So because it's based on postcodes, and obviously the element that we have added onto the system, and I know that's quite technical, has included now other London local authorities, which didn't used to be the case, and we're trying to get to the bottom of what the issue was, but it would be equal across the board.
So we're looking at an even-ish spread. So between 5 and 10,000 settings.
It depends, yeah.
I just wanted to say, PDI settings, so we know are incredible pressure at the moment. And I think the sooner we can have this.
Of course, yeah, no,
would be
absolutely. So, yeah.
Thank you.
So school balances, just opening balance was 6.848 million, closed this financial year with 4.861. But we made an adjustment obviously because of the accreditation at one of the schools that was 1.768. We're still finalising those last figures on that. So the overall reduction in balance is only 0.219 million across the year. We just wanted to highlight the number of schools in deficit from the last quarter has gone down. So we had five in the last quarter, and we've finished the financial year with just 2 deficit schools.
And really good news that one of our schools that was in deficit is no longer in deficit. So really good deficit recovery plan work. Yeah.
Is there any learning experience that could be rolled out to other schools from that? It would be helpful, perhaps.
Certainly being very proactive, having the DFE SRMA review, I think really helped in terms of a external review. And actually, really good, was a really good person that did that review as well, which made it, in my view, it's easier then for the governing body to look at some of the potential decisions when there's an external
So an objective review,
not just someone. Yeah.
Sorry, what SRMA review?
Sorry, that's the Department of Education do a school resource management assessor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I agree with Amanda. I think it's an astonishing achievement. And I do think it's something that perhaps should be utilised and shared with schools that are worried that they might go into deficit. The signs are that they're going to. It's an incredible turnaround in the situation they were in. Should be celebrated.
Yes. So following the January 24 forum and the agreement around reserve threshold balance control mechanism, we've applied that in MBHA. And so on here we're showing as before against budgeted income, the DFE guide 5% and 8%. So that provides the position there. Only those schools on actual income were asked to complete the forms, so there's actually less schools than this that completed the forms about what they intend to do with the reserves that the excessive reserves they have. And then looking at the threshold balance control, we kind of indicatively put how it could potentially be redistributed. This is for the forum to agree the best forward.
Nick, just one question on this. I know from my own school that there is money set aside that we weren't permitted to, as it were, accrue it, which would take it off the balance sheet, but is nonetheless still committed. My concern is if these figures are similarly distorted, then those schools that perhaps would be hoping for a distribution will fail actually to see anything. I'm not sure how helpful the table is in its current guise.
I think we only put the table in there to, it's kind of like you're damned if you do or if you don't, because if you didn't have anything with any figures in, it's difficult. You know, so what we're discussing. They are very much indicative. And obviously they're not taking account of the plans. And the whole thing is, once plans are taken account of, you know, we'd expect most, you know, the schools to have had plans.
That would have been perhaps a helpful second table to see, because it's an approved plan. Then to be talking about figures that would be distributed would then not be very helpful.
It is highlighted on the form that's before plan use to balance.
And
it's more an idea of how one is seeing how they would like to distribute it. Not saying that these would be the figures.
But if I may, so for example, I'm going to put it right out there because All Saints has got this big chunk of money that must look really attractive to primary schools for struggling. Yeah, but if I may, we've already spent 500,000 of that. So it's gone.
Okay, so the bit that we're looking at is the blue bit of the table. So there is no redistribution from All Saints.
Okay, can you explain that blue bit properly? Because I honestly didn't really understand that. I looked at the pink bits, understood what should be distributed, but then didn't really understand those figures where they were coming from.
So in January, in the forum, it was discussed that excessive balances would be different. We would use a balance control mechanism. So that was excess was 20% for nurseries, 12.5% secondary schools, and there's a minimum threshold of £15,000. So that is what's been applied to this based on the budgeted income. So across all the schools, how that would look. And that's what's been provided here. And then we've calculated it based on your normal budget allocations, percentage wise, how that would look if it was given, distributed out between the schools. And then if you just wanted to apply it to deficit schools, all completely indicative figures.
But sorry, can I just question two figures? Because this is why I didn't understand this table. If you look at the figure for, oh golly, is it St. Barnabas? It's got a 409 DFE guide balance. You then look at its distribution of 239,895. You then come down to All Saints, it's got a 417 distributable excess balance, and there's no distribution. So that's where I was coming from, why I didn't understand this table.
So the percent.
Sorry, you need to look at the first column in the blue. That's the amount. That's above the threshold. That's the threshold amount, the new threshold amount. And then the clawback is anything over that. So it's not related to the 409.
Oh, I see what you mean. So our eight.
So that's
Sometimes it's allocated in sorting out the amount that's clawbackable.
Yeah, exactly. So that is the 5 to 8%, depending on if you're primary or secondary in the DFE guide, which we have to provide to DFE. And then the threshold balance is our new threshold control mechanism that was discussed in January. What the percentage of 20% and 12.5%. So
12.5% for secondary.
for secondaries, yeah. 20% for nursery, primary, and special schools. So it's increasing your balance allowance.
4.9%.
Any other question? Yes.
Nicola, can I just ask, in pulling the figures together, are you my understanding is you're not just looking at DSG funding, you're also looking at incomes generated by schools themselves in terms of the returns that were required. And I guess my question is it lawful for the local authority to claw back funding that the schools have self-generated in order to be sustainable? Because a number of schools have additional extracurricular activities or extended day, holiday provision, etc., which generates income for the schools, which then enables them to be sustainable going forward. And my understanding from talking to the head teachers that I'm responsible for the early years sector is that there was no differentiation in return. So I think that's a query for me that I would really like answered as to whether actually is DSG one thing and separate funding that schools have self-generated a separate issue, because it feels like it's all been put into one pot. And I would really like to understand actually the legalities behind the local authority trying to force some of that funding back. Very short question.
So I mean, in terms of your question, we captures it in 4.4 page 13. So the forum did actually link with that this in January 2023. It was debated and discussed.
That question wasn't asked at the time, actually, and it's quite a good question about the legality, isn't it?
We did ask the question. They're not the word legality wasn't used,
No.
but there is, from what I understand, the difference between VA schools and non-VA schools,
Yeah.
and self-generated and non-generated.
Yes.
But that's the reason why, when we set the amount at 12.5% rather than at the DFE rate, we did that in order to take into account the fact that we wanted to be not as stringent as the DFE rate, to take that into account and allow for schools that then generate their own income. But I think that VA schools can generate lettings income, and that is what we call off balance, actually, but actually can be kept separate, and therefore they don't have to be accountable for it to the local authority because they own their own building. Whereas community schools like the school that I run are the building belongs to the local authority, and I'm grateful for that as a teacher.
Yes.
So I have to take,
However,
with that comes different slings and arrows, and that means that we are accountable for the money that we make because you own our building.
So in the case of the early years, we're not VA, we
No.
can't academise, and we don't own our own building, and
No.
we pay our own rent.
Yeah.
So I guess, and that's one of the nursery schools. The other nursery school also has to pay their own contributions towards the upkeep of the building. So it feels like we're in a very different position. I wasn't part of Forum in 2024 in January when the conversation was made. I have read the minutes. I couldn't find the answer to my question, which is why I'm raising it here tonight.
well,
So
one of the early years schools isn't it?
one is, but
Yeah.
a few aren't. So
Okay. That's
so,
good.
yeah, so absolutely. But I think it's just important that we have clarity because what you're asking us to do is to agree a methodology that is not just for now, but will stretch on ad infinitum. So in the current situation, it might be one group of schools that's affected. Next year, the year after, it'd be a different group of schools. And so I think it's really important that we have absolute clarity about the methodology that we are agreeing and what's in and what's out of that calculation. And if it was agreed before and I've missed it, I apologise, but I have read the minutes, so I couldn't find an answer.
Also, whatever's agreed today, without being pedantic, is only agreed until we agree something different. So we could put it on the agenda for this time next year to review the methodology again. So it's not going to be fixed in stone forever, whatever's agreed to cease.
Just ask a couple of points. What's proposed here is lawful, and as Todd said, it has been previously discussed. I think it is helpful that we've added some figures here. They are indicative because schools that do have, I'm not too sure about the term excessive anyway, but if I use that term, we've tried to adopt an approach here whereby there could be potential for clawback only to redistribute to other schools, but actually through the really thorough process we've run with schools, returns have come in, and as Amanda has said, either that the balance has already been partly spent, the schools have demonstrated that it's committed. If we go back a couple of years, why are we doing this? We know that funding is really tight for schools, particularly for small schools. And what we regularly hear about the DFE is, but what's for all those schools with large balances? So we, I think, felt as a forum, it was worth putting a bit of rigour, frankly, into that process. write to schools with balances to say, candidates for poor return set out how they are committed. Now, of course, it may be one or two schools and governors genuinely say, well, of the 400, 100 isn't committed. Surprisingly, nobody's come back to us to say that. So the conversation we're having here is esoteric, really, because we're not expecting in the near future that schools will say part of our excessive balance is uncommitted and therefore it should be clawed back and redistributed.
Ian, the reason you're such an outstanding authority is you have such well-run schools, you see, and so all the governors have already thought about how they're spending their excess funds.
But my broader point would be we are able to demonstrate to DfE when we're saying, you know, for instance, small schools are really struggling with their funding, or, you know, why are you fully funding the teachers' pay awards, whatever it might be. Actually, you know, we're keeping our own house in order here in KNC. And yes, there are some schools with slightly larger balances, and they've set out as in writing, the governor's minutes show it, you know, how they are committed maybe to a one-off capital project or to other, you know, lawful spend.
David.
We certainly, on behalf of my sort of peers within the primary sector, there is concern about it's fair to say there always has been. That notion of, Amanda touched on it earlier, you know, without context, things don't really make much sense. I suppose what everyone's got to be kind of very deft at doing is submitting things that are plausible and actually make sense in terms of what the plan is for that excessive amount, whatever one wants to call it. In terms of the here and now, the chair of consultative did communicate with all heads last week. That wasn't really long enough. You know, there was quite a tight turnaround. But of the heads that did respond, there were no heads that responded to say that if it ever came to it, they would support any clawback funds being distributed to schools in deficit. I think that's a very important point to make.
Yeah.
And the other point is that of those that did respond, there weren't large numbers who responded. They were unanimous consensus around sending, you know, that money was going to be shared. It would be shared evenly amongst all the schools. That's kind of where we're at. We have a consultative next week. No doubt this will be discussed properly at that meeting. Can I do anything?
I think the only thing to say is that we agree with what you proposed, really. Simple as that. But I actually, listening to what you said, Claire, around nursery and running nurseries, so I do think that there is more fluctuation in terms of finances in nursery, and you're open to very high levels of fluctuation in your budget. We discussed that before we came to this meeting, and actually, I wouldn't be averse to the idea that we actually raise that 20% to an even higher level, if that's something that Forum wanted to discuss or consider. And I think it would be wise to do that because budgets can move quite rapidly now.
So an extra buffer.
Yeah, especially when you're thinking of clawing the money back already. So I think that would be something to consider, actually. And that might achieve what you were asking for.
So perhaps we could put that on an agenda going forward. In the meantime, any other comments on this?
I should know this, but it's a clarification around that. You talked about action plans in relation to, was it an action plan in relation to how you, if you were going to, if you would earmark that budget, that
Excess.
in programs. And what form? And of course, that approval of that, who actually approves it other than governing bodies, certifications? No, usually these action plans, which are, this is how we're going to spend this money, so we'll have none left. I'm guessing. We should have one. So that's approved by you, Anita, yeah? So it's, but if it's been through your governing body and it's approved and there's plans, we're not, you know, we've got the evidence, as Ian said, we've then got the evidence, we've got a robust process. We're not going to be saying, well, hang on, why are you, we've got no intention to be saying, well, why are you planning to refurb an IT kit or something? You know, it's been through, we've got evidence, it's been through a process with the governing body sign off, fine. Yes, well, there's been ample time to develop those plans, and I guess so. But
We did give quite a
We
long
started this
period of time for this before it starts to roll out.
2-3
for
years
that
ago.
reason.
Yeah.
yeah. So the proof of the pudding will be in.
This time next year.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, shall we draw that discussion to a conclusion? Schools forums therefore asked 251, note the DSG deficit carry forward conditions. 5.2, note the level of school balances. 5.3, note that schools 3-year budget plan position will be reported at the next school forum. And 5.4, agree the methodology for the redistribution of any funds brought back from schools with excessive balances at the end of year 2025-26. Are we happy to agree 5.4? Anybody against 5.4? Okay, 8.6, recommendations from the Piney Budget Review Group. Julie has sent her apologies, so I think you're going to say that.
I am, yes, thank you. So, as you know, this is the feedback from the High Needs Budget Review Group that met earlier met in May. And if I just pick out the main points in the paper, under 3.2 and 3.3, as we'd already flagged at the March forum meeting, we knew we needed to review the top-ups for Ormiston, Kensington, Queens Mill, and since then we've had more detailed information from the trust in terms of their costs. And but they've been very open with the information they've shared with us. And we've been able to ask questions, and as a result of that, we are recommending that there is an increase to their top up of £4,000. This the school were asking for that to be backdated to April. However, we feel as we're already in this financial year that we should not we should not go back to April, but we should increase from July, which also means there's not a full year cost, obviously, to the DSG in the current year. That part. I also draw your attention to paragraph 3.6, which is Julie and I have met with St Charles Sixth Form a number of times, and we did agree that we'd bring something to forum. It's more for information than anything. That because when a sixth form pupil is when a pupil is at sixth form, a number of pupils come from other or live in other boroughs, the £6,000 it moves from the other borough to Kensington, and we can then pass that on to the provision. However, where it's an expanding provision, they're increasing the numbers, and as you can see, they're increasing, quite significantly. There's a lagged basis for us getting that 6,000. It's always several terms behind, and actually, it's not even lagged; it's delayed. So we don't get an adjustment back to the September of the academic year. We don't get the adjustment until the following April, which means in this circumstance that the college or sixth form are out of pocket, going up to 114,000. We're going to talk about 19 pupils that haven't been funded. Julie and I have met with the DfE and asked if a special case can be made, if anything can be done to review this, and they didn't agree any sort of exceptional funding, or that we can seek funding from other local authorities, DSGs, because in other words, other local authorities got that funding within their DSG, they just don't want to pass it on. So while this doesn't seem correct, we've done everything that we can, but we said we will bring it to schools forum attention.
Can I ask, because I know the funding is completely different from schools because it comes directly from the DFG, but who decided to increase their role from 58 to 74?
So the sixth form, as a result of increase in demand. So if they know the demand is there,
that's not quite the answer. So when, for example, All Saints expanded, we did that and agreed back.
Yeah, so we do
therefore in advance we knew we were going to get some bulge funding. But was this agreed with you in advance?
So we agree the place numbers, but with the proviso that we can only pass the funding on once we receive it into the DSG, because it wouldn't be right for
There's no bridging.
K and C. Yeah, so there isn't any additional funding.
So the issue here is, I feel sad for St Charles, but if they're looking for 114, where's it going to come from? Schools funding then, rather than DSG, directly from the DFE, yeah?
So
That's what they're asking for.
no, that's more just to, they just want Forum to be aware of this issue.
So they're not
It's-
asking.
No. We thought it would be appropriate that we noted it, but noted with concern to support the local authority's case to pursue the Department of Education for this.
Just to add to that, sorry, of course. Also, just important to note, that is the normal state of play once it's described as an FE college. So any increase in your numbers, your funding does not come to till at least the following September, if not actually following April. So whilst that's more challenging if you have smaller numbers, that is the normal.
Yes.
Welcome to my world, I think is one.
Yeah.
I think perhaps a couple of things perhaps to add. You're all absolutely right. Of course, the post-16 SEN funding is different to pre-16. You know, it's not statutory, but actually in terms of the work that we're doing and Julie is doing, you know, with all of our partners across the age range, we're trying to improve and enhance the SEN local offer, particularly at 16 to 25. And it's fantastic for us that, you know, more young people with plans are looking at a local pathway. Perhaps they're in some of sixth forms, perhaps they go to Morley, and they're definitely going to St Charles sixth form. So they've got shorter journeys, they're seeing quality of provision, they're seeing pathways that suit them. And, you know, whilst we can't necessarily solve this issue today at Forum, we did think it was worth highlighting it because actually, you know, it's post-16 funding is interesting, isn't it, Craig?
Is the local authority looking for a resolution that says something along the lines of schools for noted with dismay the lack of support from the DFE for? Is that what you're looking for?
Yes. The link would be that it's great that we see our SEND local offer developing this way, particularly at post-16, and that we have local settings. It may be that we're able to put some high needs capital in to adapt provision at post-16, and we've demonstrated that we have to do that by agreement with our parent care reform. What we can't do through Forum is address the funding, but at this time of the DFE looking at all sorts of matters in education, maybe they'll look again at that. So yeah.
Mariana?
Just to build on your point, what the offer that St Charles and of course the Morley are offering is very different from, I think there's 3 of us doing post-16 with pretty exclusively academic. I don't know, you might be a little bit more. And so actually it is fulfilling a real need. It's potentially reducing need. And I think that's important to acknowledge.
And I think also now is the boom in post-16.
Yes.
So we talk about falling roles in primary schools and secondary schools, and that's coming down the line. But at the moment, we have a boom in post-16 places. So most post-16 providers are looking to expand their offer over the next 2-3 years.
Peter?
I just wanted to gain an assurance that this OKQ increase of 4,000 per pupil, making it 32,700. Have you done any work on comparative costs? I mean, I'm not saying OKQ doesn't do a good job, but I'm asking, is that comparable with other costs across London per pupil?
Yes, yes, it is. And certainly, and a lot of other provision like OKQ, you know, is very full. And so then if we look at the alternative to the independent sector, we know that average cost is, 61,000 from the national report. So yes, so Julie certainly has looked at that as well. And obviously we asked the same question in finance. So yes.
And if I could add to that, Anita, you'll be aware that Kensington Queen's, which is our first local special school, a new school, has relatively recently joined the new multi-academy trust, and they flagged early on that they'd want to have a really close look at the cost per child and what the top up should be. And I think they've done a hugely thorough piece of work and produced all the evidence for Julie to have a look at. So come up with this proposed top up, and yes, compared to outborough or independent sector provision, it's not out of kilter.
It's value for money.
Yes.
Thank you.
Anita, had you finished?
No, I was just going to point forum to section 4, the DFE delivering better value, which that 2-year program, grant program has now ceased, and there's details of which forum would know about the work streams that have happened. And we had a closer grant review meeting with the DFE, and they gave us very positive feedback in terms of the work streams and the way, the schools and SEND and various areas involved, how things have, had such a positive outcome. It's good. And then I just lastly just talk about I say lastly, but there's actually 2 things I want to. There's a section on the strategy for SEND, which I'm sure you'll be aware of, is being reviewed, and there is a proposal in 5.2 for funding, providing funding for some supervision for SENCOs via educational psychology and extending the remit of specialist teacher practitioners, this was supported by the iNeeds budget review group. Section 7. Section 7 covers the additional funding that special schools, AP and AP, will receive for the pay awards in 25-26. There's different funding stream for mainstream schools and for early years, which are covered in the separate papers. So we've estimated the allocations they'll get. And lastly, just on the forward plan, where it says about the response to any government proposals, we all now know that there is we know from the spending review that there's a white paper expected in the autumn. So clearly there's going to be a lot of work for us in the high needs budget review group and forum in terms of looking at implications of that.
Any further questions for Anita? Okay, so schools forum is asked 291. There's been an increase in cover for funding improvement to 32,700 with effect from July 2025. 9.2, note with concern the difficulties facing St Charles Sixth Form College. 9.3, endorse proposals for delivery of the Fairer Futures SEND strategy 25 to 30. 9.4, note the outturn 24 to 25 and cumulative deficit and successful completion of the grants that funded work streams. 9.5, note the additional 2025-26 funding for school budget grants, special schools, AP and hospital providers is estimated to total £364,091. And finally 9.6, note the forward plan for the HNBRG.
Should we change 9.1 to take into account Craig's point that it's negligence of the difficulties facing sixth form colleges?
Yeah, I think that would be.
And just to check, 9.1 there was an agree, so can I just check that everybody does agree with that, because I think I agree into that.
Yeah.
Nobody against it. Continuing the Anita show. 8.7, 26-27, school funding formula options for consultation.
So all we're doing here is just seeking approval to start the consultation in order to about the potential funding formula for 26-27. So no decisions in terms of what that funding formula will be. You remember that for 25-26 we moved at the minimum amount towards the national funding formula factor values of a 10% move. We now know that we're not going to receive any more details about the national funding formula and requirements for 26-27 until sometime in the autumn. So that will be probably a bit later than usual. Doesn't mean that we can't start the consultations. And then the paper goes on to cover the mainstream school element, the bit that's funded for 5 to 16 year, 5 to 16 provision, and how the new school budget support grant will work. There is a calculator on the DFE website which can estimate their funding. There is also funding for the first time for schools with either SRPs or SURPs, whatever terminology. So that's good that there's recognition for that. So it's what to say. Any questions for any?
Yes, on appendix A, I tried hard to winnow out the winners and losers. Couldn't see any consistent pattern. That was my first point. But my second point is that it does seem that if you go, well, 10% has quite a variation in outcomes in terms of percentage change per pupil funding. When you get to 20%, it's quite huge. And I was basically thinking that we should keep it as the change minimal as possible, given that we don't know the government's sort of plans for introducing the full NFF. We don't know the date. So
We're not agreeing them tonight, though. We're not agreeing them tonight.
No. But I'm just, well, okay. Well, just to note that. Right. First question: who are the winners? Who are the losers? Is there any pattern to this? And secondly, I just note that as you get up to 20%, there's a quite large difference in winners and losers. I don't think we should be there.
We've had this, haven't we? I mean, we've done this. This must be the third or fourth time we've done this. And each time as a forum, we make a decision to take the path of, should we say, least harm to the most vulnerable schools. And we keep continuing that, not knowing what the government's going to do. So I just wonder how much time we want to allocate to the same concept going forward.
Yes. So in terms of pattern, so it is hard to see a pattern because of the different factors in the formula, but it's definitely the main thing that changes is it's reducing the standard funding per pupil and increases the ESACI funding per pupil. So shifts money to more deprived children using the ESACI. One thing that is probably quite important to note that I hadn't realised until we had a meeting with the DFE on Friday is that the ESACI data is all going to be updated for 26-27. So who knows what impact that is going to have.
Oh, wonderful.
So we can't we can only model on the data that's there already.
Are they changing the definitions or just recalculating?
So they update the data, but it's only every 5 years.
Are they going to base it on the 2021 census?
It's a good question.
Well, that won't be good, would it?
No, it's got to move money out of London.
Yeah, and significantly,
yes.
A much smaller population.
Yeah. Yes.
I had a conversation with the DFE about the census data because they haven't been using it for early years for the past few years. So my understanding is that they will be using the latest data. So I assume that this may apply to the ESACI. Yes.
Yes, and then on to the second point that we have this lots of discussions and consultation and what option should we go for, and do some of them don't, for some schools doesn't make much difference, other it makes big differences. I mean, Forum could say that you want to consult with schools that we move the minimum, you don't have to go with 3 options. You could say Forum propose that we move the minimum amount of the DFE allowed to create the least turbulence.
I'd like to ask the age-old questions right in FG for a second.
Yes.
Because obviously in this statement there's this 0.9% increase that's built in that was supposed to get rather than 0.5. So actually, is it likely they'll set the MFG at 0.9 rather than 0.5?
So from discussion with the DFE on Friday with other local authorities, I would be surprised if the MFG, I don't think it's going to be any more than 0.5. It could be 0.
Oh.
Because they want to try and move schools in line with government policy towards the national funding formula, focusing more funding on deprivation nationally. That
has a massive bearing on that decision, doesn't it? Because actually you could create winners and losers, as Peter's saying, but quite stark winners and losers quite quickly in that circumstance.
Yes.
If we start moving towards in a faster way.
You're absolutely right. That's just what I read from what was said. I certainly don't think the MFG will be more than 0.5%. Because they want to move, albeit maybe fairly slowly, towards the NFF.
Does that affect our DSG amount, or does it affect, would it always be the same amount, or is it likely that the actual amount that the local authority gets to share out actually would go down in that circumstance?
So the MFG doesn't affect the overall schools block of the DSG, but the EDACI would.
It would, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just thinking of Peter's point as well. What we're being asked to do in 7.2 here is to agree the principles for agreeing with funding formula. And then 7.3, agree the options to go forward for consultation for primary and secondary heads.
Yeah.
Now, Peter's point is 20% seems extreme, and Amanda is saying rightly that we always take a sort of cautious approach. On that basis, do we want to change 7.3 so that we're deleting the 20% option from that being presented to the heads, or does it actually matter? Does that make sense?
I think we should have the suite of options available so we can have a broad conversation.
We had mostly a heads agreeing 10% last time. I think that was more the view that we should go for an larger amount. But that wasn't.
So we'll send all three options through as the original proposal. Okay.
I take Amanda's point about, not being more aggressive, perhaps I could put it like that. But we don't know the terminal date by which we're going to adopt the NFF. If we knew it was, 28, 29, we could say, right, well, what's the difference? And we'll prorate it, but we're not in that position.
Sorry, I think you misunderstood. I didn't want us to be more aggressive.
Okay, sorry.
What I was saying is over the last several years, we've been very mindful of some of the more vulnerable schools, and so therefore adopting the move to the funding formula that was just to them.
Right.
So that was, and I just didn't want some schools out there very vulnerable to take a look at the three options and really fear that we might choose the most extreme option. That was my only point.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions on item 7? No, in which case, 7.1, schools forum is recommended to note the new school budget support grant. 7.2, agree the principles for agreeing the school's funding formula for 26-27 budgets. 7.3, agree the options to go forwards for consultation with primary and secondary head teacher group in September, October 2025. And 7.4, note the next steps for agreeing school's funding formula for 2026-27. Lots of notes. We should, however, note that in 7.2 and 7.3 we are agreeing. And everybody just consider that they're happy to agree that.
Yeah.
Anybody again? Lovely. A8, directors.
Thank you. So, this report is for information only, and it's mainly focusing on the early years expansion grant, as well as the DfE announcement in May 25 regarding the early years national insurance contributions and teachers pay grant. So we decided locally to implement or distribute rather the grant as a flat rate across all of our providers, both schools and early year settings in the private, voluntary and independent sectors. And we've got obviously the different rates for the 2-year-olds as well as the under 2s, and they are higher than in other local authorities across England. It's worth mentioning. We are passporting 100% of that rate to the schools and settings, so we're not retaining any of that funding. And with regard to the early years national insurance contributions and the teachers pay grant, this time around it was very clear that this funding is only available for public sector early year settings. So we know that there is a discrepancy there between the public sector and the private, voluntary and independent sectors. And I think nationally, the private, voluntary and independent sector have expressed their dissatisfaction with that decision. And I had a meeting with the DfE again last week, and Claire and I sit in another group, the London Heads of Early Years Network. So we have all sort of raised concerns about that. But once again, we will be distributing that funding across the eligible settings, and the payment will be made in the autumn term.
Fortunately, I think there was a great move in the private and voluntary sector in this in Chelsea, that we might actually come up with funding completely. We don't get enough funding where it's not, we're taxed for not funding. So many things with this funding, with the new government, have been very, very difficult for us. We're under pressure. I think we've lost 5 nurseries this year already. So I just want to say with that we are really under pressure, and we're very, very, we don't want to, we think that our early years advisors do a fantastic job, but, and are really fighting for us, but it's been a very, very difficult few months, very documented. Thank you.
Any other questions on that? No. So 2 things to note. Schools forum is after the following. For 1, the local supplementary funding, and for 2, the early years national insurance contributions and teachers' pay grants for 2025-26. Any other business? Great.
This will be my last forum.
No, that's my notes.
Yes.
Any other business apart from Craig? So, Craig, this will be your last school forum. I just wanted to thank you for your time and contribution. Did you have anything you wanted to say?
Only that I've really enjoyed my time at Kensington and Chelsea, and I think the relationship development between the college and the local authority is in a really, really good place. So I'm very proud of that. And once I know what my interim arrangements are, I will let you know.
No, that's fair. Thank you very
So
much.
thank you.
Thank you.
Many thanks to Craig and the team. Yes, I would say that the working which we all do as a whole school and college system with Morley has been transformed, and a huge amount has happened under your leadership, Craig, up in North Kensington. So we're going to miss you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anything else? Concludes the meeting of school forum. Thank you.
Yeah.